What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and I wanted to do a video kind of outside of a normal podcast to discuss the new standard rotation cadence. Now, if you didn't hear, Wizards is changing the way that standard rotates, and it is going from a 2-year rotation, so that, you know, sets that are 2 years old or so, you know, a year and a half plus, get rotated out each year. Well, now they're going to have it so that that happens every... There's still going to be a rotation each year moving forward, but each set will remain within standard for at least 2 years rather than the one, you know, previously, which is an awkward way of just saying, we're skipping rotation this year, and the rotation that was going to be happening this year is in fact going to happen next year. And only the sets that we're going to rotate out this year will be rotating next year. So as a result, here on YouTube, you're not going to see the huge swath of rotation-proof decks in the next couple of months, which you normally would see, because that's not a thing. So standard, as we know it, will not be changing in a significant way other than the new sets being introduced into it. Now, I find this development very interesting on a couple of levels. On the one hand, as an arena player, I'm really bummed about it. Honestly, my initial reaction is very negative, which is unfortunate because there are upsides, and we're going to get into that. So the initial negative feeling is that I'm already incredibly sick of the top tier cards that we have in standard right now. You know, right now, a lot of cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty have been around for, you know, at this point, over a year, and they have proven themselves as being incredibly powerful staples in the format that almost every deck in the meta is running. You know, we see cards like Reckon or Bankbuster showing up just absolutely everywhere, and it's giving card advantage and aggressive tempo to decks that otherwise wouldn't have it. I mean, why do you think mono white control can exist? Well, actually, the mono white elements are all really good, but if it runs out of gas, you can just throw a Bankbuster, and over the course of a couple of turns, you will have drawn 3 cards and you have a clock on board for 2 mana. I mean, you invest more mana over time, but still, like, it gives you that in a way that that deck should struggle with, but it just doesn't. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Fable the Mirror Breaker, another card that is widely considered the strongest card in standard. And I don't think people are wrong for saying that. You know, whether you're debating, you know, Bankbuster or Fable or the next one we're going to be talking about, we're kind of picking hairs, or we're nitpicking, we're splitting hairs. At the end of the day, these cards are all fantastic, and to the point where the top tier decks all have to run them in order to be competitive. And that is a huge problem. There is a massive power divide right now between the absolute best cards and even the second best cards. I'm not even talking about the bad cards. Bad cards don't even have a chance. But there are plenty of cards that look good and promising, but they're not as good as this, and therefore you shouldn't play them. Right now in standard, as a deck brewer, it is miserable. Like, absolutely miserable. I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not exaggerating. It is rough. Every single game that I go into on the ladder in Arena feels like the same game I just got out of. And if I'm trying to do something different, it is going to get run over in the same way as the last person. This is the definition of a stale format, and it's not fun. And so one of the things, so I'm glad that Wizards has acknowledged that right now, standard is in a problematic state. They are correct in that regard. The gameplay, the interplay of these mid-range decks is not unfun necessarily, but, you know, there are plenty of games out there that aren't unfun per se, but I don't want to go back to them repeatedly, and that's what we have here. You know, Final Fantasy IX is one of my favorite video games of all time. The story is excellent, it is super fun, even the grinding is, like, enjoyable and engaging in a fun way. Like, I love it. I think that game is absolutely fantastic. Pushed the PS1 to, you know, the limits of its power. Like, honestly, for a second I forgot I thought it was a PS2 game because it just looks so good. But my point is, it's a single-player narrative on rails game. I have no desire to revisit that game every day. You know, I'll play it once every couple of years to revisit it, and that's only because it's masterful. Are the games in standard right now masterful? No. They're fun, they're engaging, there's some good back and forth, but if you're trying to do anything else outside of the meta right now, it just doesn't work, you know? And it bites. And the next one, of course, that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is Invoke Despair. This card is just, it's a guaranteed 3-for-1 every single time it resolves. And that's the thing right now. The best cards in the meta right now, we have Invoke Despair, we have Fable, we have Reckoner Bankbuster, there's also Wedding Announcement, Wandering Emperor. These cards that give you, like, at least 2-for-1s, almost guaranteed on their face, if not full-on 3-for-1s every time. Like, those cards are just going to be the best every single time. And under the old format, under the previous rotation cycle, we had this reprieve, this oasis that we were on our way to, that in a couple of months we could say goodbye to these. And now we just won't. And that's a bummer. I also want to call out one other card, Sheoldred the Apocalypse. I hear a lot of people on various social media and comments on various YouTube channels talking about how they were really looking forward to Sheoldred rotating this fall. Fun fact, Sheoldred was actually not scheduled to rotate this fall. Because Sheoldred came out in Dominaria United, it was the set that marked the previous rotation, and as a result, it's the set that we were going to have for the longest in Standard, even under the old format. So Sheoldred was not going to be rotating in 2023 regardless. She was scheduled originally to rotate out in 2024. But now, under this current model, Sheoldred the Apocalypse is going to be legal in Standard, assuming she doesn't get banned, until the fall of 2025. And honestly, I have to like pause a second to not throw up in my mouth at that thought. Because it's going to be an unpleasant slog. Now, what makes this so problematic? Well, the current mid-range meta is decks that are capable of delivering these big 2-for-1, 3-for-1 swings, so they can do 1-for-1 removals on the opponent and just carry on and get and outvalue the opposing player. If you're trying to build on a theme, if you're trying to build, like say you really like dragons, you know, and you want to build a standard deck and you're hoping to build a standard deck around dragons. Like, we have a lot of cool pieces right now. Like, we have Rith, we have Invasion of Tarkir, we have all these little pieces that look like they should support dragons, but the problem is there isn't enough support for dragons to make it even remotely competitive to these decks that are just generic good stuff piles. And the problem is, as we get more and more sets over the years, and these good stuff cards don't go anywhere, the good stuff piles are going to continue to get better. And that bums me out. Now, I mentioned that it wasn't all bad, and I do want to play devil's advocate for a little bit, because, and see the other side of it, rather than just going doom and gloom, because I've already done that plenty so far this video. The flip side, so Standard's going to be around for, you know, it's going to be rotating on a 3-year cadence instead of a 2-year cadence. Okay, which means if we had been on that schedule previously, there are some other cards that would be in Standard right now that aren't, because they rotated. So let's look at that for a second. Let's take a look back at some of the cards that we lost in the last rotation and see if they would have a chance at maybe mixing things up. First one that comes to my mind, which I know I'm gonna, you know, this will be an interesting one. Your reaction at home might vary. Ruin Crab. Ruin Crab is a card that rotated in fall of 2022. It was in Zendikar Rising. And if the old rotation format had been in effect, Ruin Crab would still be legal in Standard today, alongside cards like Jace Perfected Mind. So a very solid, oh, and Tasha City's Laughter would still be legal too. So a tiered mono blue mill deck could easily be a thing that exists right now in Standard. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm gonna leave that up to you. But at the end of the day, it's possible. Like, that could be a viable archetype. Another thing that I want to point out is Landfall synergy from Zendikar. And the reason that I want to point that out, on the one hand, I mean, there are some really fun pieces like My Beloved Scootsworm, and Ruin Crab is itself a landfall piece. But I want to point out that landfall aggro might have actually stood half a chance, maybe, because of cards like Brushfire Elemental. Brushfire Elemental, if you haven't had an opportunity to play with this card, it's a hasty 1/1 for 2 with Daunt, meaning that it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Daunt isn't officially keyworded, but whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So if you could Brushfire Elemental on 2, hit your land drop, Topiary Stomper on 3, all of a sudden you have a 5/5 that your opponent's going to have a very difficult time blocking. this is capable of generating a ton of heat and a ton of power very, very quickly, which is something that we are lacking in Standard in a big bad way. Granted, removal is dirt cheap. Maybe this wouldn't have a chance, but I don't know. Like right now, aggro doesn't exist in the meta outside of mono red and best of one, especially. It does exist in best of three, but it's not super popular. And then soldiers. That's like the only example. And they're out there. They're fighting the good fight. But like, could you imagine how much better would soldiers be if they had, say, Luminarch Aspirant? I know Luminarch Aspirant itself isn't a soldier, but can you imagine it in that deck? Well, that would be a legal card in Standard right now, if rotation last year hadn't happened and we had been on this cadence. So I'm not sure that there wouldn't be some other options that we don't currently have. So who knows what's going to be coming in these next sets and what could happen going forward, and how much of what we have today is going to carry on, and how much of it is going to be overshadowed by future cards. I'm not sure. We don't know. But it'll be interesting to see. The other thing that I find really humorous is there's a ton of talk over the last few days since this was announced around what will get banned now that things are on a slower cadence. I haven't heard hide nor hair from Wizards about them changing their ban philosophy. I have no reason to believe cards are going to get banned that otherwise wouldn't. None whatsoever. So who knows? Maybe they will aggressively ban things in order to shake up the meta, you know, rather than leaving things to kind of stale, you know, be this stale thing that they are today. But I don't know. I don't think they'll do that, because the reason for this change is to make paper more appealing to a Standard audience. You know, right now, if you want to get your hands on a playset of the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. You're going to be spending quite a bit of money in order to make that happen. It's an expensive card. A lot of people want it. It's incredibly powerful. If you're going to be playing Standard in any way, you're going to need it. If you invest in a Standard deck today, as of this recording, this card would only be legal in Standard for, you know, another couple of months under the previous plan, under the previous cadence. But now it'll be available for more than a year. You know, if you buy Fable and the Mirror Breaker right now, you will get well over a year of Standard play with it. All of a sudden, playing paper Standard does sound more appealing, and it sounds like a safer investment, which it didn't before. However, why would I want to play paper Standard? That question is still out there and hanging. Previously, there was this idea that if I grind at PTQs and if I show up to my FNMs every single week and I bust my tail, I can get enough, you know, points to qualify, or I can qualify for qualifiers that qualify me for qualifiers that maybe someday will get me on the World Championship stage. You know, that was the dream. And so this idea of like, if I'm driving to all these different events and I'm, you know, putting in the work, I could make it as a professional Magic player. That dream existed. And Wizards, a few years ago, dismantled that dream. They took it apart. They discontinued organized play and replaced it with a major, you know, the MPL, you know, the Magic Pro League, where there wasn't this, you know, path to get up there. And then the pandemic hit. And for the record, make no mistake, the order was that Wizards dismantled organized play, took away all the stuff that they had painstakingly built over literal decades. They got rid of all of that. Moved to this like esports model with the launch of Arena, and then the pandemic hit. If you hear anyone blaming the pandemic for the lack of organized play, that is not accurate. It accelerated things perhaps, and like we had to roll with it. Like it definitely was a factor, but it wasn't the reason. Wizards were making moves into the esports space well before the pandemic. Just so be aware of that. So it looks like they're trying to course correct here. They've brought back the Pro Tour. So things look, and they have these regional qualifiers at big conventions now. And so it looks like they're trying to get back to the paper Pro Tour that we knew in the past. And that is cool. I like that. I'm glad to see that. And if that is successful, and by successful, I don't just mean having good viewership numbers and having cool pros and a neat scene that people are talking about again. Because we have that. That's in place. But if that is going to be successful, as far as Wizards is concerned, people at the ground level, people like you and me, need to feel motivated to invest our time and our money into these cards and into these events in the hopes of qualifying. Because that's where Wizards makes their money. That's the business. That aspiration to make it needs to be present. You need to have a reason to show up. And just knowing that if I spend $500 on a standard deck, it's not going to be obsolete in 3 months. Honestly, that's not that isn't honestly that impressive. Or that's not a guarantee. Because the reality is, when a new set drops, the standard meta should shake up a little bit. And if the standard meta shakes up a little bit, maybe my cards like Fable aren't the thing anymore. Well, granted, Fable's just it's an anomaly. It's so good. So that's probably not going to happen with the new set release, but it could see a banning. It might just get banned out from under us, and we might have to deal with that all of a sudden. And so the idea of my investment into my standard deck isn't safe. It looks like that was the key issue they were trying to address with this new rotation cadence. And the reality is, standard will always be a volatile format. Investing money into standard cards is never safe. And so what's the cost of going to this rotation format? Well, as a result, the format is going to more than likely stay stale for longer, and it's going to be less fun. And people like me, who are just trying to jam some games on Arena and have a fun experience, are going to be stuck having to cut down that shaman token and destroy evil, the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, 2-for-1ing myself to deal with my opponents resolving this stupid 3-drop that isn't going to frickin' go anywhere. It sucks. It's just unfortunate. There's the possibility that this extended rotation cycle is going to change things, but I don't see it. The other thing of note is alchemy. So alchemy on Arena is going to retain the previous cadence. I believe the thought process there is that if you're playing standard on Arena right now and you don't want to be stuck in this quagmire of a stale standard, I keep using that word because it's just what it is. If you don't want to be stuck playing against these cards indefinitely, switch over to alchemy. Because come September, they will be rotating out. And that might be fine. Honestly, this might be the best thing that's happened to alchemy since it launched. And frankly, alchemy needs some help. It really does. Because the current execution of alchemy is not particularly enticing. And community backlash towards it has been massive. So and honestly, I haven't really thoroughly enjoyed my time with alchemy. And on top of that, I haven't played historic much at all since alchemy came out either. I don't know, the digital only cards just don't spark joy. They don't intrigue me. The Oracle of the Alpha Displacer Kitten, Dirtlefest and Rusko in the mix, like, that doesn't sound like fun to me. That sounds like a less fun experience than going up against Sheoldred Invoke all day, frankly. But that's the alternative. And it is an alternative. And Fable and Invoke and Bankbuster will be rotating in September in Alchemy. So, honestly, Alchemy and Standard being differentiated in that way, I think, is good. I don't know that it's enough to change people's perception of Alchemy, but we'll see how it pans out. So, anyway, I have a lot of thoughts on this, as you can see. If you want to hear more thoughts, if you want to ask me specific questions, you can do so over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/hamhocks42. I stream over there Monday through Friday, starting at around 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we go for about 4 or 5 hours every single day. So, hoping to see you over there. In the meantime, stay good to each other, stay classy, all that happy jazz, and I will catch you on the next one.